Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Big Nickel IDP Podcast. I am your host, Jon Macri, fantasy analyst at PFF. Training camp opened up this week, and so did the floodgates of every hype video you could imagine from now until September. But for this episode, we're going to be looking at some players who maybe aren't getting the same level of hype coming off of down years so that we can ask the question, are these guys toast or can they get back on track in 2023? It's bounce back time, so let's get it. All right, folks, I am very excited for this episode because not only does it mean that we are kicking off training camp season this week, but it also means that I get to talk to one of my favorite people in IDP land, just as I have every year since this podcast started, talking bounce back candidates. Joining me from Football Guys, the one and only Dynasty Tripp. Tripp, how are you, good sir?
I'm doing well, man. Appreciate you having me on. It's always a blast to talk football with you, and I'm honored to hear that I've been on every single time, every year now. So it's a tough topic to talk about, but it's a lot of fun.
Yeah. I'm excited that you're back too. I love getting to talk to you, and yeah, it's fun. You chose this topic way back when I was first planning out all the episodes like 3 years ago, and you thought bounce backs would be fun and challenging. And little did you know I was going to make you do it for 3 years straight at least, and and keep coming back to it to challenge you and get your thoughts on the exact same thing. So I apologize for pigeonholing you there, but I appreciate you coming up with a list every year.
No, that's awesome, dude. That way I can get a couple mulligans and not take so many 30-foot jump shots this year. So
Fair enough. Fair enough. I know. I honestly, I wish I could remember. Like, I should probably do like a recap of guys that we mentioned last year or something, and see, where we were at. But yeah, my brain is all over the place, and I don't think of these things until it's too late, unfortunately. So uh, yeah, we'll get into it here. Like I mentioned, we're talking bounce back candidates on the defensive side of the ball, of course. So these are guys who, for whatever reason, be it injury or inefficiency, had down years from their career norms, or at least what we've come to expect from them. So it's kind of up to us here to pick out the ones who are going to get back to the fantasy producing machines that they once were, and hope that they're not just naturally declining to the point that they'll never get back to the IDPs that they once were, like so many of us who have passed their prime. So without too much more rambling from me, let's kick things off with one of Tripp's picks to bounce back this 2023 season, starting at the linebacker position this time around. Who do you have as your first bounce back candidate?
I thought I'd start off with Jerome Baker, the inside linebacker for the Miami Dolphins. He's not that old, right? He's only going into age 27 season, so it's not an issue of him falling off because of age exactly. And he's a player that's not been all that productive for the last couple of years. And a big reason for that has been the scheme. Miami Dolphins scheme, man heavy, blitz heavy. This is a guy that plays only about 2/3 of the snaps actually in the box, then almost another third of them he's playing on the defensive line, actually, according to Pro Football Focus alignment data. And he now transitions from a scheme that had really become an outlier simply for the fact that it hadn't really evolved with the rest of the league, which is Josh Boyer's man heavy one high system in Miami. He's been replaced, of course, by Vic Fangio, who's pretty famous these days, despite the fact that he was not even the coordinator last year. But nevertheless, what we're going to see out of Vic Fangio is, even though it's a fairly complex and sophisticated defense, it's going to be closer to league averages in terms of use of man and use of blitzes and such like that. And therefore, his utility, his deployment is going to be closer to league average. And so last year, he played a little over 1,000 snaps and only had 100 tackles. And as a result, that 10% tackle rate is just really low for a linebacker. And so I feel he only played 89% of the snaps last year. I feel like that's probably about right this year, but I think that he can easily get 12% tackle rate and get up over 120 tackles. And the ceiling that he's had for big play leagues isn't going away completely. Yes, he blitzed a lot last year. He probably won't blitz as much this year, but he'll still rush some. Vic Fangio does blitz the inside linebackers and has them rush and simulated pressures as well. So he might only have 50 blitzes, but it's better, it's not 100, but still it's an opportunity to score a few sacks and to get some tackles for loss as well. So I think he's a decent player, not awesome, but a decent player who's going to see the field. He's not going to lose snaps to a third safety because they have next to nothing at safety in Miami. So I feel confident he plays a pretty healthy snap share, and he's one of those kind of free squares among LB3s. I'm in leagues where people are just trying to dump him for whatever they can get for him, and I think it's because they've just kind of lost patience with him for had 120 tackles 3 or 4 years ago and hasn't met that number since. And it's largely, in my opinion, because of his scheme and deployment. And I think that corrects this year. He seems to be a player that's commented that he's content with his utility. I mean, granted, it's easy to say, I guess you follow that kind of training camp hype, but seems to be a player that sounds happier in his role this year. And so I think he probably will be more productive for us.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's always kind of been like the biggest issue with Baker, right? Was that scheme, the Brian Flores and Josh Boyer defenses that, like you said, man heavy, blitz heavy defenses that had him playing in man coverage and rushing the passer so much of the time that it killed his tackle efficiency as a linebacker and put him well below the league average in that regard. So yeah, I've never been like the biggest fan of Baker, and it's mostly been because of the scheme. But I'm with you in the thought process here because I think it makes sense, given the new defensive scheme that he become a bit more consistent, right? And a little less boom bust, which is kind of what he's been, right? When he gets those sacks, those big weeks, they're great. They're great for IDP. We just never knew when they were going to come. And then most of the time he had a really low tackle floor. So I think if we could get a little bit more consistency from him, that'll be a huge part of it. The only issue I guess I have about with him, or at least concerns, is even taking into account some of like the poor tackling schemes that he's been a part of, as well as like the amount of time that he's spent blitzing. His tackle rate has always kind of consistently been below expected, even taking all that information into account. So accounting for it, it's usually harder, at least from what I found, is for players to kind of buck that negative trend than it is to regress from like overperforming, for example. So that's the only thing that worries me about Jerome Baker. Like I think you're right. The league average tackle efficiency, that 12%, is about right for him. And him getting into maybe a useful LB3, low end LB2 kind of thing on a weekly basis would be perfect for him in a new defense. And like you said, there'll still be opportunities to blitz, but it won't be nearly as much as what he was doing under Flores and Boyer. So it was one of the things I'm worried about for the Minnesota linebackers. It was always something that kind of hurt Jerome Baker. We'll see how he kind of gets back into it here. Are you any concerned about potentially losing snaps to David Long, or you think they'll both get out there at a fair rate and both be useful, or do you like one over the other?
No, I probably like Long a little bit more and have Long
Okay.
ranked a little bit higher. He doesn't seem like a player who profiles as a bounce back. But yeah, I think so. I
Right.
think
Yeah.
they'll both be some utilities. I would be drafting, Long as an LB2 and Baker as a LB3 in leagues
Yeah.
where say a 14-team league.
Yeah. Yeah. Makes sense. I like it. All right. So that's Jerome Baker. All right. My linebacker bounce back here is going to be Devondre Campbell of the Green Bay Packers. So Campbell, he's really been very consistent as far as being healthy. He's played at least 16 games in 5 straight seasons before he missed 4 this past season. So it wasn't like a significant chunk of time, but it was enough at least to kind of hamper his overall production and keep him from kind of performing at the same high level that allowed him to finish in that top 5 range at his position in overall grade, run defense grade, coverage grade. In 2021 he had that really strong year. But yeah, last year he missed the 100 tackle mark after posting 146 in 2021. Didn't record a sack for the first time in 5 seasons either. So down numbers across the board for Campbell, even with the missed time. Basically, other than the missed time, the only thing that nothing really changed all that much. It was just, there was his role basically stayed the same. They brought in Quay Walker, a first round linebacker there. Wasn't a huge part of his production dip because he was still the kind of full-time guy in that defense whenever he was healthy. So, as far as bouncing back this year, I feel pretty good about the Packers defensive scheme, at least ranking as like one of the more tackle friendly schemes for linebackers this season. So I think you combine that with an expected every down role from Devondre Campbell. I don't think he should have any problem kind of getting back closer to that 2021 production, as long as he stays healthy, of course. So I know Quay Walker is a favorite among a lot of IDP managers, especially in Dynasty. I've seen him go earlier than Devondre Campbell in redraft leagues. I don't know that he'll get the same level of playing time as Devondre Campbell will, again, as long as he's healthy. So, I'm a fan of Devondre Campbell bouncing back this year.
Yeah, I like it. I was listening to a pod this morning. Gary Van Dyke and Johnny the Greek have a podcast, SGPN, and they were regaling some sleeper ADPs and some of their analysis. And Quay Walker is the LB7 by sleeper ADP. Like, I would love to hear someone make a case of why that should be. Yeah, they said the same thing I think I'm about to say, which is that they're reversed. I mean, Campbell's like LB 29 or something like that, off ball 20, linebacker 29, and those two should simply be flipped. Quay Walker has some upside, a good dynasty pick, like you said, but there were some maturity issues last year that seemed to flare up, and I just don't think that they're ready to pass the keys of defense over to him.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's concerning if it's not a dynasty league. Hopefully that was like a dynasty ADP, because who knows with sleeper, sometimes it's kind of all over the place in their ADP. But yeah, if Quay Walker at LB7 and Devondre Campbell at LB29 for redraft just doesn't make a lot of sense, especially when you put these guys in their expected roles. Campbell should be the every down guy, and then I'd be surprised if Walker surpasses him this season if both guys are healthy.
Yeah, me too.
All right, let's go to another linebacker situation here for your bounce back candidates. What are you thinking about with your next pick?
I thought I'd talk a little bit about the Cleveland Browns and tab Sione Takitaki just for a minute, in part because I'm interested in the salaries. I think that it's one of those clues that sometimes we in the IDP community don't necessarily take advantage of when it's just right there in plain sight. And what's interesting about Takitaki's contract is that it's $2.4 million. Doesn't sound like a lot. Well, he was injured in December, popped an ACL, I believe. So odds are pretty good that he misses half the season. If they're paying him $2.4 million for half a season, that's $300,000 a game. That's basically starter money. And maybe that's, I don't know, jumping to a conclusion with math there, but I think it's a pretty compelling case when you can contemplate that Anthony Walker is only making $1 million. I think he's making the veteran minimum, or 10 grand more than that, or whatever it is. And so that's an interesting dichotomy to me. So I'm interested in the whole linebacker situation in Cleveland. And if you kind of take the three guys that look like reasonable candidates, which are Jeremiah Owusu-Koramoah and Anthony Walker and Sione Takitaki, they seem to fit across the board pretty clearly in the old school traditional roles of weak side, strong side, and a linebacker. The question then is, if everyone was healthy, who would play and who would come off the field? And I think because of health, it stands to reason that Walker is a guy to look at pretty early. And because we wrote about him as a sleeper in Football Guys, he was at the time outside of the top 60 linebackers. Well, yeah, easy. Yeah, pick him up. He's probably almost certainly playing full time or close to it as the season starts. And if he loses the role to Takitaki after Takitaki comes off PUP, well, so what? Pick up Takitaki or pick up somebody else and plug him in there. But the two guys that interest me in terms of being able to play the majority of the snaps are Owusu-Koramoah and Takitaki. In part, both of those guys are much better athletes than Anthony Walker. And I think that they fit better in terms of, I think both of those guys will profit from being in a Jim Schwartz defense, which is more of a one read and go type of defense. Both guys profile better as hit and run linebackers. Takitaki was a guy that was kind of pigeonholed as a Sam because he wasn't good on the processing side. And so it seemed like he needed to be relegated out there, and was really only pressed into the middle because of injuries, first to Anthony Walker and then to Jacob Phillips, who was playing full time for like 3 or 4 games before he got hurt. And Phillips, I'm reading, is probably on the roster bubble, and though. It's kind of discounting that a bit, but it seems to be that what the athletic profiles seem to me for Taki and Wosu Koromo, who are both over 9, I think, relative athletic scores at Kent Lee Platt's math bomb calculations. I think that they're good fits for that defense. My issue with Owusu Koromoa is that he has been dinged a couple times in public by his linebacker coach. It's the same linebacker coach as he had last year, Jason Tarver, has dinged him for needing to put on weight and build his body up for the rigors of an NFL season. And so I really think if we want to contemplate JOK as a full-time linebacker, we really need to hear that he's put on some good weight and that he's taking on and shedding blockers in preseason and in the inter-squad scrimmages and whatnot. So, I mean, I was big on him in the spring, but the more I think about it, the more I'm thinking he's more of like a Kaiser White sub-package type guy who just is never going to get more than 85% of the snaps. And so that's kind of leading me between the money and the way the roles fit. And just the way they fit the defense is kind of putting me on Taki, which isn't super exciting because people are like, well, he's hurt, I can't really use him. But you could probably put together LB2 production for nothing. You could start off with Walker, switch over to Taki mid-season if necessary, and if you got the bench, just carry them both and see how it goes. But it's kind of the way I like to play IDP fantasy football. I draft my entire offense first usually and then see what's left of defense. And so these are the kind of guys, the Jerome Bakers and the Takis that I'm looking for. Well, and so if guys like David Long slide because people aren't on them, that's fine. I take those guys too. But, it's like I'm just kind of attracted to that situation. That being said about Anthony Walker, I mean, it would not be the first time Anthony Walker has faced a more athletic, younger player and held that player off for a couple of years. That would be the case for both Taki and Owusu Koromoa. He did that in Indy. He had Bobby Okereke was drafted in the 3rd round, and everybody just assumed, well, he's obviously there to overtake Anthony Walker because Matt Eberflus likes the athletic guy in his defense and run a hit type linebacker. And Walker held him off. So, I wouldn't discount Walker either. But basically, the short answer is the long answer, I guess. I'm long-winded today. Well, the long answer is all these guys are good values at cost, and you could put together LB2, LB3 production with these 3 guys for nothing.
Yeah, it's a great point, and it's one of those situations, right, where I mean, I probably don't even need to look at the ADP. I could tell you right now, Jeremiah Owusu-Koramoah is probably the first Browns linebacker drafted in almost every single league. Anthony Walker, Sione Taki, these are guys that are afterthoughts right now because they don't have the sex appeal as JOK, right? So Anthony Walker, obviously, I think he only played 1 game last year, so he got hurt, but he was the starter for the Browns in week 1. And I know, as the season progressed, the Browns linebacker situation was pretty crazy. It was different leaders in snaps every single week between Jacob Phillips and JOK and Taki. And so who knows if it would have stayed that way. But I think the Anthony Walker injury did play a part in that too. I think they did plan to have him as their number 1 linebacker because of the experience alone. But you look at somebody like a Taki, like you said, I like the call because you could put him easily on like a watch list if you're on MFL or something like that, where you could kind of keep an eye on these guys and then see how the season progresses. If Anthony Walker's inconsistent or it looks like they want to move away from him, then you can pick up Taki for free as well. And it's a situation where, I'm just not, I don't think it's worth investing in JOK this year as kind of the first Browns linebacker. I don't think you want to plant a flag by saying in a draft, you're going to be the first guy to take a Browns linebacker and say, this is the guy that's going to lead the group, because it really could be anybody. I mean, even Jacob Phillips, who knows if he emerges, but I think for the most part, it should be Anthony Walker that starts the year. And then, like you said, there's a very good case to be made for Taki to come in there as well. So, great call. I love the thought process there. And who knows? We'll see. I think we talked about it with Tom as well, with Jim Schwartz coming in. Will we see a little bit more consistency among the deployment for these Browns linebackers? I hope so, just for IDP's sake. But I mean, it wouldn't surprise me if they just continue to utilize these guys in situation specific roles as well. And it becomes a little bit frustrating for IDP managers to try to keep track of and guess who's next, which is a reason to avoid the group, or at least take the best value of the group as well in drafts.
Yep. It's the old running back thing, right? If you don't know who's going to emerge from a platoon, just take the last guy.
Yeah.
Right now, the last guy's talkie because he's not healthy. And then
Yeah.
of the healthy guys, Walker's the healthy guy.
That's true. Yeah. All right, let's do another linebacker here. Last linebacker on the bounce back list. So I went with Devin Bush. So this is a guy. Well, I guess it's relative to what he's bouncing back to, but a former top 10 pick. He's just struggled to kind of stay relevant in the NFL and for fantasy purposes for that part. Since his rookie year, and the only time that he was able to crack 100 total tackles in a season was in his rookie year, in large part due to a torn ACL in year 2, and then he was relegated to more of a part-time role over the last 2 seasons. But with Bush's time in Pittsburgh done, he kind of gets a fresh start in Seattle, which also brought back Bobby Wagner. But it's expected to be the Seahawks are expected to be without their leading tackler, Jordan Brooks, for at least the majority of the regular season. So Bush, I think, is the best bet to kind of play second fiddle to Bobby Wagner there in Seattle for as long as Jordan Brooks is out, which could stretch into November at this point. We don't know. We don't have a timetable for return for Jordan Brooks. I don't think it's likely that Bush plays like an every down role in Seattle, like it used to be with the Seahawks, where there were 2 every down linebackers. I think last season they started to experiment a little bit more with some 3 safety looks, and they had some success there where their defense actually performed a lot better with just the 1 linebacker on the field. So I think they could go back to that. But even in a range of kind of 70 to 75% of defensive snaps, I think he could push for that 100 tackle total in a very linebacker friendly defense with the Seahawks. The Seahawks ranked among the top 5 teams in deploying one of the more expected tackle friendly schemes for linebackers this coming season. So I think that helps Bush potentially kind of surpass some of those expectations, even on a slightly lower snap count. So for me, he's another one of those guys, could be a value candidate as well, but a great late round target to kind of help fill out a linebacker core in leagues where there's maybe 3 linebackers are required to start, or like those 14, 16 team leagues as well.
Nice. Bush is a guy that's always puzzled me. I remember watching his last game where he played against Ohio State. And I was really surprised when people started to say, well, this guy's a top 10 linebacker. And of course, at the beginning, it started with, well, the Bengals are going to take him. I'm like, well, good old Bengals. This was 3 or 4 years ago when their defense couldn't get out of its own way. And then the Steelers jumped in front of him and took him. I was just blown away. Yeah. In the game against Ohio State, they he was supposed to be this athlete, this cover guy. And they just kept attacking him with wheel routes out of the backfield and just ate him up. And it forced Michigan to drop into a zone, and then they would just run against the zone, and then they were running right at Bush, and they were blowing him off the ball too. This guy's a top 10 linebacker. I was blown away. So I was just looking at his numbers a second ago, fast forward to now, and he's gotten his quarterback rating, opposing quarterback rating, according to Pro Football Reference, has gotten worse every year he's been in the league. Yeah. And he's going out there now, and it's certainly agrees he's the second guy. I mean, obviously they signed him. They're going to put him in their second guy. The question is how does it fit with sub packages? What is his percentage of play? And what I saw watching the Seahawks defense last year is that, like you mentioned, that they started to find some success there playing an extra defensive back on the field. And it was the rookie Kobe Bryant playing in the slot that seemed to work for a couple of weeks. And then teams figured out, I was like, well, we can attack a rookie overhang player. That's easy enough. And then so that got Cody Barton back out there for a while, and the defense was just not very good. And so I'm interested to see how it fits together this year. And what I looked to is they signed Julian Love. So now they have 2 straightforward safeties, that are, Quandre Diggs is a good player. And then he's out there with Julian Love. And then they got Jamal Adams, and that's just a total wild card. How much can they get out of Jamal Adams? I don't know if anybody knows. That guy's. I hate to use the saying that players can't stay healthy, because I feel like it's a crutch argument. But in the case of Jamal Adams, it's just this guy. I think that they feel like anything they can get out of him is a bonus. So it really comes down to me, in terms of, it's a Bush versus Adams in terms of who's, it's a too many mouths to feed issue. It's like who's going to get fed, who's going to get playing time. Mm-hmm. And if Adams is healthy, if they can get 30 or 40 snaps out of a game out of Adams, then they're not going to get those guys to be on the field a little bit together. But I think that it really cuts into the opportunity for Bush to get on the field. So that would be my concern, is that what does it look like with everybody healthy? Now, granted, not everybody's going to stay healthy. People are going to get hurt. And so there's an opportunity for them to maybe play more there. But it's an interesting one for sure. I'm interested to see how it plays out.
Yeah, I agree 100%. I think that is a very likely scenario if everybody's healthy, is that they do kind of go back to those three safeties. I think the Julian Love signing was kind of telling there. Maybe that's also telling in Jamal Adams' health a little bit as well. There still hasn't been a timetable for him to return, even though they kind of expect him to be back in time for the season. We don't know for sure. I would have loved to have put Jamal Adams on this list, but I'm pretty sure I would have put him on this list maybe last year or something like that again. So I'm not getting burned again with Jamal Adams, because like you said, yeah, the injury stuff sucks, right? It, sometimes it does. It's certain players, it hits them harder. But yeah, I'm with you. I think, if Jamal Adams, Quandre Diggs, and Julian Love are all healthy, we could see kind of Julian Love, maybe Jamal Adams eat into those Devin Bush snaps. And I think it makes perfect sense, because like you said, Devin Bush, not the best NFL linebacker, despite being a top 10 pick. He was definitely kind of miscast in that role coming out of the draft. So I think any reason to kind of keep him off the field, that the Seahawks should take it if they're looking to be competitive. But yeah, the way things look right now, I could still see him getting on the field kind of enough to be fantasy relevant at a pretty decent cost.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Let's move on to the edge defenders here. Who do you have as your first edge defender bounce back?
Well, first of all, I'm going a little different than last year. Last year, I was like, all right, let's see if I can't find some guys who I know are going to play volume, who has good situation and opportunity, and just kind of hold my nose and think they're just, yeah, I know they're not that good, but because of situation and opportunity, they should get enough volume that they should make a difference. And so I had forgot one of the guys is Bud Dupree. He went on ahead and got hurt, so it figures. Another one is Frank Clark, and I got a notification in season from Sleeper. It said that Frank Clark's status has been changed from healthy to sus.
Sus,
yep.
Yeah.
Sus.
Yeah, that's apropos
so
for sure.
I'm not. So my strategy on the edge bounce back players is going to be a little bit different this year, and I'm going to look back, and it's going to be a theme to it. I have several guys who have been first round picks, some of them have made good money, gotten big contracts, and people seem to sour on those guys quickly. And I feel like it's like a perception thing. Like you see a guy like James Houston who rushes the passer 100 times, gets 8 sacks. Everybody's, oh, he's not a flash in the pan. That's the real thing. Right. And then you see a guy that was awesome for an entire season, and he's an early pick. Like, oh, no, he's a bust. He actually can't play. You see this in March Madness a little too. Like, you see a team that's like number 9 in the country, and they get a 1 seed, and everybody says, "Oh, that's terrible. It's an outrage." And then what they do is they think that an 8 seed is going to upset them in the second round. Well, they're still a number 9 team in the country. Not going to lose to an 8 seed in the second round. And so my first guy along these lines is Chase Young, the defensive end for the Washington Commanders. Chase Young was really good in his rookie year. He played really well. He was in the top 10 pass rush win rate of all edge defenders across the entire league, according to ESPN collecting and reporting on Next Gen Stats. And you just don't forget how to do that. And then people say, well, he wasn't as good in his sophomore year. Well, sure. I mean, it would have been hard to be as good as he was in his rookie year. And then he was injured, and people want to point to what happened to him last year. It's important to know that he was severely injured. He didn't just pop an ACL. He popped the patellar tendon as well, and had to have a graft taken from his other knee to reconstruct his first knee. So there were people who were dogging him because he wasn't coming back as fast as your typical ACL tear. Well, he had a whole lot more happen than typical ACL tear. And in fairness, he may be permanently reduced because of that, because those are serious injuries. But I don't think we can draw that conclusion after 3 games. The next thing people want to talk about is the 5th-year option. I think that people really don't appreciate how expensive a 5th-year option is. It was for his 5th-year option cost was $17.4 million. It's like 80% or more of a franchise tag. It's a big investment. And what the Commanders did is they made a decision earlier in the offseason. They decided to pay Daron Payne. And a lot of people didn't think they would do that. They did it. And that's where the money went. There wasn't additional money to put the franchise or the 5th-year option on to Chase Young, because now going into training camp, they're going to be at about $7 million over the cap. So they were $10 million shy on putting this 5th-year option on Chase Young. So they made that decision. And you can debate that. What they saw was a player who was healthy and productive, and they decided to put the money into him instead of Chase Young. Can't fault that. It does not mean that Chase Young is a bust. And I think that that's the perception. I think people think that, oh, if a guy doesn't get his 5th-year option, he must be a bust. Jordan Brooks didn't get must be a bust. Well, he's not healthy. He can't really fix that very easily. So, all that being said, is I'm kind of like arguing away the excuses or the counter arguments that people are making to him without spending as much time saying that he's a good player, because he was really good in his rookie year. And I'm just willing to bet on a guy that I saw do it, bounce back in a defense that I know is good. This defense found its footing and was effective down the stretch. Now, if people are looking at it from a team DST in their fantasy leagues, they didn't quite what they wanted because it didn't create the big turnovers. But numbers have shown, history has shown, that a team that tends to do well on the points against and the yards against is able to sustain that year over year. I like the investments that they made on their defense. I think it got a little bit better with the pieces they got. And so I'm bullish that Chase Young can bounce back. What does that mean exactly? I mean, I don't know if he's going to bounce back and be among the league leaders in sacks, or if he's going to be the next Nick Bosa or anything. But I think it's fair to say that this guy can be an above average pass rusher on a good defense. And I think that has real value. I think there's some merit in the idea that a kind of a rising tide of a good defense with good pass rushers up and down the line can help to elevate him. And I think that he's a decent bet for a double-digit sack season.
Yeah, I love it. I mean, I've been on the don't call Chase Young a bust train for for a while now, because you just can't judge him because of the injuries, right? Like you said, that rookie year was incredible. There's a reason that he was the number 2 overall pick in the draft. We saw what he did at Ohio State. He was getting the Nick Bosa comps because he was as dominant, in some areas even more dominant than what Nick Bosa was, because Nick Bosa had injuries during college as well. So Chase Young was able to compile even better stats there. All these things have to kind of be taken into consideration, because he's going into year 4. Really, it's kind of year 3. He just barely cracked 100 snaps last season. We talked about him last episode as well with Jace. Jace had him as a breakout candidate. I know I'm optimistic. Jace is optimistic. It's nice to hear you're optimistic about Young as well, because I think it is absolutely too early to call this guy a bust. And you mentioned it at the top, how I think it's relevant, the amount of hype that a player gets, right? Because it matters as far as perception and how it affects ADP and value, IDP value and stuff like that, because there was significant hype around him obviously after his rookie year. Maybe too much. I know he was being crowned as kind of the edge one for Dynasty and things like that already. Now it's kind of seemed to overcorrect to the point where everyone just kind of hates him because he didn't live up to their expectations and he really let them down. So I think you kind of have to take that into account and find a happy middle there for Chase Young. And you say a bounce back, I like it, because if he can just get back on track, I think that's the main thing. If he can push for those 10 sacks or more, possibly even like if he gets 9.5, 8.5, something like that, I think people would be a lot more satisfied and feel a lot more comfortable about him going into that 5th year as well. If he just gets back on track and stays healthy, that's obviously the main thing, right? But yeah, it's hard. I just don't want to hate on Chase Young. I think he's still a very good player, super athlete. I think he'll be able to recover from the injury. Like you said, it's a significant injury, but I think he could bounce back to the point where he's a relevant NFL edge rusher again. And imagine if he gets traded to the Lions or something like that. That's been one of the kind of the main trade rumors out there this offseason, is that the Lions are interested. But I could easily see, if that were to happen, that the narrative around him would shift super fast, right? People would be rooting for him. Everybody would be very excited about a fresh start and, how he's going to look in Dan Campbell's defense and playing across from Aiden Hutchinson. We can still have that here in Washington. The defensive line is very good in Washington, and I think there's a chance that he absolutely bounces back this year. So I'm 100% with you with Chase Young.
Nice.
All right, let's go to another guy that has let me down specifically, because he was easily probably I would say not probably, definitely my biggest miss last year. I was very high on Marcus Davenport with the Saints. So he is now with the Minnesota Vikings. It was a career year in 2021 when he landed 9 sacks in just 11 games to go along with a career high 82.0 pass rush grade and an 88.8 overall grade. Unfortunately, he came crashing back down to earth in 2022. Obviously, the high expectations to follow up on a breakout 2021 campaign kind of hurt me. But I'm not gonna toss the guy aside because of one season. I think there's still some underlying numbers that are promising for Davenport as a potential bounce back here on a new team with a potentially bigger role. You look at, obviously the half sack, that's all he had last year, was a massive miss. And he did get relegated to more of a rotational role than in years prior as well. So he was playing just around 50% of the defensive snaps. So if you look again at those underlying numbers and pass rush metrics, there was a drop off from 2021 to 22, but it wasn't nearly to the extent that I think his sack numbers would suggest. If you were to compare his numbers from 2021 to 2022, the biggest thing obviously that stands out is the sack totals going from 9 to a half sack. But the drop off in total sacks compared to the drop off in pass rush metrics points to probably being unlucky more than anything, considering the variance in sack rates from year to year. If you look at pass rush grade for Marcus Davenport, it went from 82.0 in 2021 to 75.0. So not a huge drop there. Pressure rate from 15.1% to 13.3%. Again, not a significant drop off. Win rate 20% down to 18.8%. That win rate is still very impressive. Again, the difference, is in the sacks, right? I think, if he were to be somebody that I think came close to his sack totals from 2021 or even exceeded them, seeing as he played around the same number of snaps, nobody would really bat an eye at the dip in the pass rush metrics. So that at least stands out to me as there's a potential there that this is still a very good edge rusher. He'll have a chance on a new team with a potentially larger role as a starter opposite Danielle Hunter. So I would think that he could get back closer to those 2021 sack and the playing time lines up in Minnesota.
Nice. Well, I like this call too. I think it's a really interesting one. You posted something on the Bird app the other day, and it said something like he was the player who had the fewest number of unblocked and cleanup sacks of any player in the NFL. I could be remembering this wrong, but I think he had the most the year prior. I don't know if you posted that or I saw somebody else posting that, but I was really intrigued by it because I remember I was on him too, and I wrote him up in the IDP draft kit that we had. I had Davenport and Josh Sweat, so I don't know if 50% is a good hit rate for IDP analysts. Analysis or not, probably not. But anyway, I had it written up in there, both of those guys, and that was the one kind of thing that stuck in my craw. Is like he might not be as good as I think he is, but I felt like just that he was really developing as a pass rusher coming down in 2021. And so I was just terribly disappointed in 2022. Yeah. And so I guess my take on him is that it reminds me a little bit of Jadeveon Clowney. And you and I had him both as bounce back candidate in 2021. So why I remember that, I don't know. But I do remember that we were both right because he had like 9 sacks. We kept saying, there's this big joke. The guy can't get 10 sacks. It's like, well, right. 9 every year. Isn't that enough? He's not great, but he's fine. Right? And so I feel like that Davenport's kind of a similar player. Just really impressive conversion of speed to power. And now he goes into a Brian Flores defense where they're going to be blitzing left and right. And he's not going to be asked to, I wouldn't guess, to sit in there and try to read, stand up at a tackle and try to read from the edge as much. And so I'm kind of attracted to the idea that he's going to have an opportunity just to get upfield and not think. And so I think that he's in a position to succeed here. And I think that if he settles into a Jadeveon Clowney kind of a 9 sacks a year type of thing, that's fine. Like, it's not an edge one, but I mean, I think he can be a productive player. And so I like his chances to rebound here too. So I'm on board with you. I don't know if we would want to debate whether or not he was a 15 sack type of a guy, but again, I think that, again, a former first round pick that the Saints traded away 2 first round picks to get. And it's similar to the same theme that I mentioned a minute ago, where it's just people just want to say, oh, well, he didn't live up to expectations and he's a bust. And it's an all or nothing type of an argument. And I think it's just time to reframe the argument here, reframe the perspective and the lens on what this guy can be. He's not going to be a guy that I thought maybe there's a chance he would kind of step into the top 10, 15 edge rushers in the NFL last year. That didn't happen. And I'm not bullish that will happen, but I think that he can be a guy that's kind of pretty solidly in, kind of the 20 to 25 range, 20 to 20, 30 range, maybe, is in terms of just ability. And so I would be, I don't know, he's not there obviously now, but I think he could still probably get there. And from a production standpoint, be a guy that you'd be comfortable with kind of plugging in there as your second guy or platooning with another guy based on matchups and for IDP leagues.
Yeah. I like it. I think that's reasonable. And yeah, it's about kind of resetting expectations, right? This is a player that the Saints traded 2 first-round picks for to trade up in a draft to get him. And same thing with another guy that we'll talk about here shortly, who, potentially overpaid in the NFL, but we don't have to set those same expectations for IDP, right? So I did pull it up while you were talking there about the cleanup rate from 2021. So this is surprising. He was actually third best again, third lowest as far as cleanup and unblock pressure rate again in 2021. So 23.8%. I think he was 20.2% or 20.6% last year, and 23.8% this season before that. So it's been pretty impressive, surprisingly, for a guy that hasn't been great as an IDP. There's a lot of signs that he's a very good pass rusher and a very good NFL player, and it does a lot of good things. It's just converting the sacks, right? So we know finisher rate isn't like a stable thing year to year. I think there's a decent chance we could see that kind of correct itself here in 2023 in Minnesota. All right. Yeah. So speaking of the guy that I mentioned before about high expectations in the NFL, the Miami Dolphins paid this man handsomely after they traded for him. Who is your next bounce back candidate?
Now, my next guy is another Dolphin, and I didn't really think about that until probably today that I have 2 Dolphins on the list. I was really surprised to hear you and Kisling, a couple weeks ago just not be very excited about the Dolphins. I really was. Like, man, they got quite an assembly of talent here, and Vic Fangio is the guy that everybody wants to be like in terms of who the best defense. Mike McDaniel, the head coach, said, look, we just went out. We said, we're going to pay the most money and get the best guy. And so they picked Vic Fangio. Is he been around a while? Yeah. Are there an awful lot of coordinators out there emulating what he does to try to, win games? Yeah. So anyway, Bradley Chubb, I think, steps into a good situation here, and people say, well, it wasn't good last year. Agreed. Well, it wasn't good for Jalen Phillips either. I think most people agree that Jalen Phillips is good. I was impressed with Bradley Chubb with the Broncos last year. I just really thought that was just early in the year. That was about as dynamic as I had ever seen him look. And this is a guy that had 12 sacks in his rookie year, which was a long time ago, 2018, and then suffered an ACL, not unlike Chase Young, and lost time, and really seemed to have a hard time getting back to where he had been. And then, in my opinion, last year, I really felt like he finally was back. And I was really impressed with his play. He had 5.5 sacks with the Broncos across 8 games. You project that to a 17-game season, it's 11.5 sacks. He had 2 sacks with the Dolphins over 9 games. You project that over the course of the season, or maybe 8 games. That's 4 sacks. So that was the difference. He had 7.5 sacks in the season, which doesn't sound exciting. But like we said, Jalen Phillips had the same situation. These 2 guys had similar numbers of pressures, according to Pro Football Reference, across the year. Bradley Chubb was 15th, tied for 15th in total pressures, according to Pro Football Reference, and didn't have the sack totals that some other folks had. Some of the guys that were below him were like Aiden Hutchinson and Brian Burns and Chenna Nwosu. So I think he has the opportunity to outperform some of those guys as an IDP asset. Now, again, people are say, well, he was the 5th overall pick and he's never going to be worth it. Fine, that's probably true, right? But then again, the Dolphins traded a first-round pick to get him. They paid him a huge chunk of money, $110 million or something like that. And I'm always loath to try to bet against the NFL. I'm not going to sit here, weekend warrior and say I know more about football than the Miami Dolphins. I'm not that guy. I try to take what the NFL tells me, and they're telling me, the Dolphins are telling me they think this guy's a good football player. I don't know who else was in the market for Bradley Chubb when he was traded, but And I don't recall being thought is totally nuts. I remember them talking about him as a trade candidate, and people thought that they would get it. The Rams were talking about offering a first for Brian Burns. So it was something that was out there, is to deal a first for a developed edge rusher. You've been talking a couple of times in your pod about how it takes guys a couple of years to get going as pass rushers, and so you get a guy like Chubb who's 26 years old or thereabouts, and it's like you want to draft a guy like Chase Young. I mean, not the best example, but you draft a guy, you take 3 to 4 years to develop, and he finally gets good, then you got to figure out how to pay him. Well, the Dolphins are a win now team. They said, let's just, rather than try to worry about drafting another guy, let's just go out and pay a guy. And he's not going to be as good as Jalen Phillips. I'm not telling anybody they should take him ahead of Jalen Phillips, but I think this is a guy that can be, I think he's better than Marcus Davenport, for instance. I'd be interested in your take on that. Not a lot better, but I think they're kind of in I would definitely put Chubb as a tier ahead of him, and he would be a guy that's closer to 20, and Davenport would be closer to 30 in my book.
Okay. Yeah, I think that's fair. I mean, I think, yeah, like looking back, I was probably a little bit too harsh on Chubb with the with Tom, and I think Tom referenced it, or prefaced it with how he was paid and things like that. So I'm not for him, getting paid that much money. I know, like you said, the NFL kind of knows what they're doing, but we've seen a little bit of inconsistency from Chubb before. So I worry about, him living up to the contract and the cost of the first round pick and everything. But I do think he's a good player. I just don't know that, he's maybe worth that money. But 8 sacks last year is not bad, right? He didn't have any the year before, 7.5 before that. Then he had the 1 the year before that, and then 12 as a rookie, like you said. So hey, maybe there's a trend there, right, where he has like a really good season, then he drops down below 1 or less. But no, probably
for 4 more years.
Yeah. Yeah. No, probably not
over 4 years.
So. Yeah. But yeah, I do. I think he'll be fine. I think I like Davenport probably slightly more. I probably flip them, like where you mentioned the 25 and 30 spots. I probably do like Davenport a little bit, but the volume's going to be there. I think he is a decent pass rusher. He showed that last season on 2 different teams. He wasn't maybe as good as he was. Well, he wasn't as good in Miami as he was in Denver to start the year, right? But he's transitioning to a new team mid-season. I think we can forgive the guy for that, right? I think with a full off season under his belt and kind of starting the year with the same team and playing with the same team, because he's not going anywhere now. But yeah, overall, I feel like last year, was probably a good bounce back for him too. But I think if he can get to that double digit territory again, like he did as a rookie, I think that's what you're saying is the goal here, right? So, yeah, I don't mind it at all.
Good deal.
All right, let's go to another edge rusher here, Shaq Barrett, the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. So, Barrett's been solid since he joined the Bucs in 2019. He posted a 19.5 sack season in there. Obviously, I'm not saying he's going to bounce back to that level of of production. He followed that up with pretty strong seasons of 8 and 10 sacks, but through 8 games in 2022, he managed just 3 sacks before tearing his Achilles, which ended his season. Word right now is one of optimism for Barrett. He does expect to be fully healthy for the start of the 2023 season. I know he was taking part in mini camp a little bit. He wasn't practicing or anything like that, but the expectation is that he'll be ready to start the year. I know he's an older player, so what he'll look like is probably the bigger question here. This is the poor guy too. He lost his daughter this offseason, just incredibly heartbreaking stuff. And maybe another reason to root for him here. So, because he does still seem committed to football and getting back on the field. But, as far as the on-field stuff, he's posted consistently strong pass rush grades, always above 70, and even into the 80s for a large part of his NFL career. The 65.1 pass rush grade last year was a career low, but again, kind of hard to blame him. He didn't get a chance to finish the season and build on that number a little bit more. But I think if he can get back healthy, back to that kind of 70 plus pass rush grade range. I don't think he should have problems delivering for IDP managers consistently on a weekly basis, especially with one of the maybe the more volume heavy roles for his position in the league, where he's averaged more than 77% of the defensive snaps since joining the Bucs 4 years ago. Obviously, biggest question mark going to be how he comes back from injury, and what he looks like as a 30-year-old edge rusher. But he's always been solid. He's always been good. I think there's at least a chance that we could see him produce regularly for 2023.
Certainly agree. He's been a good player for a long time. I would need somebody that knows more about Achilles and the like to weigh in. That's a frightening thing to me. But that being said, we just saw Brandon Graham bounce back. I think he might have had set a career high for sacks last year.
He did. Yeah. First time he got double digit.
Yeah, it's like, how the heck? I mean, I was a guy. I was like, that's my edge 60. I don't need him on my team, and he gets 11 sacks. So maybe I shouldn't be on this podcast. I don't know. But anyway, I mean, that's just and this is a guy too that's not a premium athlete. I've seen people put out takes. I don't know if this is how backed up with science this is. I've seen people put out takes that the premium athletes are better able to recover from these catastrophic injuries. And so if that's the case, well, he has a 3.91 relative athletic score. Flat. So obviously it hasn't prevented him from being a good pass rusher and it's a position where athleticism correlates to production pretty highly. And so he's already beaten that. So maybe he'll beat the Achilles too. The other thing too is that I had to Google it while you were talking. It's like, it looks like his injury was the end of October. So we're talking about being 10 months out at the beginning of the season from surgery. That's tough. But I certainly agree he's a good player. I'd love to see him bounce back. He's a guy that I've been rooting for a long time. I never really liked free agency very much because I'm just old school, but that's a guy where he leaves on free agency, finds a starting job and succeeds in it. And you got to be happy for him there. I mean, that's like, to me, like Azeez Al-Shire is another guy like that. You can't get a starting job without leaving. You got to leave. And hopefully he does break out. You want to see the guy succeed in that spot. And so I love what Barrett's done to date, and I certainly hope he does bounce back.
Yeah, that's the hope, right? Definitely, I would say my riskiest pick, just because of the injury stuff and him being a little bit older. But I really like him as a player. Just kind of rooting for him more than anything here. So hopefully we'll see how it goes this season. But one to keep an eye on if he does get healthy, because there should be significant volume available in that Bucs defense. Let's go on to a couple interior players here. Defensive interior. Who is your top bounce back candidate here?
My interior defender is Eric Armstead. The beauty of this pick is it can't be wrong. He had 0 sacks and 11 tackles this year. So, let's move on. No.
Yeah. Don't jinx it.
That's right. He's going to have at least 12 tackles and half a sack. Well, this is a guy that I think is interesting track record. He's played basically 3 different positions. He was drafted as a 3-4 defensive end, 2016 or something like that. And then they moved him out and had him play, a wide 9 end position. As it was described by the Joe Staley, who was the longtime offensive tackle there, a star offensive tackle for the 49ers, as having Buckner and Armstead out there trying to rush from the edge was like having a freight train bearing down on him every play. Well, eventually the offensive tackles figure out how to fend off a freight train. He just doesn't have enough moves to be an effective edge rusher. You game in and game out, you play in and play out. And so they move him into defensive tackle in week 8 of 2021. And since that time, he played 11 games down the stretch there, and then he played 3 playoff games in 2021, and he played 3 playoff games last year. And you take that statistic, that it just so happens that 17 games, his production over those 17 games, conveniently skipping over the 2022 regular season, is 64 tackles and 9 sacks. I'd sign up for that. That's a pretty strong DT1 right there. If you can, I'm not predicting he's going to get that because what he didn't do in 2022 regular season mattered. But he was also a guy that was like Devondre Campbell, banged up and couldn't seem to find his footing through the course of the regular season and played through a lot of injuries. But the level of production that he was able to put up in he's played a grand total of about 30 or 32 games at defensive tackle. What he's been able to do just since he was switched to defensive tackle mid-season in 2021, I think is pretty impressive. And then you add to the fact that he's got Javon Hargrave coming in to play alongside him. And these guys are going to play interchangeably. It's not like Armstead's going to be the nose tackle and Hargrave's going to be the 3-tech in every play. And they got Nick Bosa on the edge, and hopefully Drake Jackson emerges. I mean, this is right up there with the Commanders as the best defensive line in the league, and it's also another good defense. And they're going to have opportunities. It's going to be a rising tide situation, and so I'm bullish that Armstead can get back up at least into that 10 to 15 range where things start to get dicey. There's really 10 good defensive tackles right now that are slam dunk top 10 picks in terms of that DT required leagues. But you're looking after that, and this is a guy that's right up there. This is a guy that I want after those top 10 are gone.
Yeah, it's perfectly said. I mean, look, 9 games last year, 0 sacks, right? That the first time in his career he's ever had 0 sacks. He's going to be much better, hopefully healthier this season. Obviously, the big thing that, like you said, that 49ers defensive line is going to be really strong. Adding Javon Hargrave in there with him as well is just going to make things easier for him, hopefully, and open up some opportunities. But yeah, I like the call. I think Armstead is absolutely getting slept on at this point. It's another one of those players where people are drafting late and there's just sorting by who scored the most points from last season. Armstead's not coming up on any of those lists. You actually have to kind of go out and search for him to add him to your queue. And I think he's absolutely a great kind of value and a potential bounce back candidate here. All right, let's do another defensive interior player. I am going with Leonard Williams of the New York Giants. So played in just 12 games last season, under-delivered with just 2.5 sacks on the year. Since his first full season with the Giants in 2020, Williams has posted an 11.5 sack season and a 6.5 sack season. So this past year obviously was a significant decline from what fantasy managers have kind of come to expect from him. 11.5 sacks, probably unlikely to happen again from a defensive interior player. It's rare for any interior defender to reach those heights more than once. So somewhere closer to 7 sacks, I don't think is an unreasonable expectation for Williams in 2023. Interestingly, despite the 2.5 sacks on the year, his 74.8 pass rush grade in 2022 was the best of his 8-year career thus far. So again, sacks were let down. Many of the stable pass rush metrics are still kind of pointing in the right direction. I think you combine that again with an expected 75% defensive snap rate. Williams should have plenty of opportunities to bounce back this coming season. One of the better interior defenders in the league, and I think that'll translate to IDP as well. And I believe I have him as a top 12 defensive tackle for 2023 as well.
This guy's such an interesting player. That's like I'm looking at the age on that card. He's not even 29 yet. Feels like he's been in the league for a decade.
Yeah.
I mean, it just seems like a hell of a long time ago that he was like the 6th overall pick, and he was out there with Mo Williams and Sheldon Richardson. They were trying to figure out who was going to play outside linebacker so they could get all 3 of them on the field at the same time, and they're 3-4 defense. And here's the guy. I thought what's interesting about him is how productive of a tackler he's been. Yeah. I thought that would drop off a lot last year with the change in scheme, and it really didn't. I mean, he's right. I didn't crunch the numbers, but he was still a productive player, even just as a tackler, trying to play through the injuries, and not as useful as a pass rusher. But just when he was on the field, he was still an adequate player, unless you're just totally big play scoring heavy. So I think he's at age 29 years old. I mean, there's a lot of pass rushers that seem to be in their prime 27, 28, 29 years old. So he's out there with Dexter Lawrence, who's out there just absolutely collapsing the middle of the line, and Kayvon Thibodeau's emerging outside of him. So another one is probably outside of that top 10, but he's another one to be in the 11-15 range with Armstead that you're going to be pretty happy with, even if you feel like you missed out. I think you'd be in good shape with this guy.
For sure. Yeah, really good defensive line shaping up there in New York as well with, like you said, Thibodeau, Azeez Ojulari, Dexter Lawrence, and Leonard Williams as well. But enough of the defensive line, guys. Let's go to the defensive backs, and we will talk about safeties. Who is your top safety bounce back this year?
Yeah, we're in nerd out time now because I love talking about the bigs and the defense and the safeties, man.
Yeah.
We we've been at this thing 58 minutes, so we're in rough shape now. We got to be here till midnight at the rate we're going. My first guy, this is a little bit of a homer pick here with Jeremy Chinn of the Carolina Panthers. There was a widespread panic in the IDP community coming around about late September, late August of last year, and because the Panthers brass were saying we wanted this guy to focus on safety, we want him to be a Pro Bowl safety. Sure enough, he was out there playing a whole lot of deep snaps at 6'3" and 210. And it's like, what are y'all doing? Well, those guys got fired. They lasted about 7 games. Chinn lasted about 4 games playing in that role because he got hurt. Well, Steve Wilkes takes over as the interim head coach and says, yeah, let's just fix this. So he goes kind of back to playing a more of a second level role where he had been for the first couple of years of his career, and he pretty much resumes what he was doing, where he's getting 10.5% tackle rate and not getting the blitz opportunities he had the first couple of years. But now he's got Edro Evero in there as defensive coordinator, and Evero has some experience using the second level players to blitz and simulated pressures. And it's a little bit of a question mark of how all this fits together with Frankie Louvu and Shaq Thompson and Jeremy Chinn. But what they did do is they signed Von Bell, and I think it's a little bit like the Seahawks, where they clearly have 2 safeties. They have Xavier Woods and they have Von Bell, and those guys are going to be the primary safeties. And Jeremy Chinn is guy that's going to spend, they'll spend most of their time in nickel. And I think that Jeremy Chinn plays most of his time in the second level. And I always love when the guys, the big 3 in the IDP show, talk about the sweet spot. They love safeties that don't play safety. I think this guy's a safety that doesn't play safety.
Yeah.
And so I'm optimistic that he's going to be used the way he was. And I know that others have said, well, we can't know until the regular season starts. Yeah, that's absolutely true. But hey, we're in the business in fantasy football of making decisions with incomplete information. And so this is a guy that I have as my overall safety too. And if I'm wrong, so what? I'll pick up the next John Owens or Julian Love or whatever. That's the thing, is just go for upside of safety. Go as high as you can. If you miss, I'd rather miss and know that I can just replace that guy with the waiver wire darling of week 2, because I don't need a guy that's a full-time free safety that I'm just grinning and bearing, hoping he gets a big play for 8 weeks while I'm missing out on the waiver wire candidates.
Yeah, that's the thing, right? Safety's super replaceable in season off the waiver wire. You could get close to the same production that you will from a top starter, right? So you're not too concerned about the risk there, and you don't really even have to draft Jeremy Chinn as the safety too, because so many people are. I mean, Derwin James is going 1, and then it's all the Jalen Petrie, Jaquan Brisker, those type of guys that people are excited about for their second season and things like that are going after him. But I love Chinn. I mean, back-to-back seasons of 100+ tackles to start his career was awesome. Only 70 last year, but he also missed 6 games, like you said, so that was a huge part of it. He delivered again, over expected in tackles, and then even despite the missed games, but he also posted a career high in pass deflections with 6. Still managed to get his annual sack in there as well, just despite just 2 pressures on the year. But yeah, my question was going to be, what do you think? How do you think they use him? And I think you're right. I think the nickel makes a lot of sense. I think when you looked at it last year, that was when he was kind of his most effective as a tackler, was when he was playing more in the slot, and he performed slightly better as far as grades go as well when he was lined up in the slot. So really like his potential if that's the way that they're going to use him. I think Von Bell could maybe be more of that, maybe the dime safety to play in the box and 3 safety looks, and then Chinn and Woods maybe getting more of the full-time snaps, with Woods deep and Chinn doing some of the kind of second level stuff, like you said. Is kind of how I'm picturing it, but I could easily see it just being like how you laid it out as well. So excited about Chinn still. I'm not down on him by any means. I can't remember exactly where I have him ranked. I'd have to look it up, but it's not, I don't think it's a low ranking for Jeremy Chinn. There's probably, I think maybe I have like some questions just about what his usage is going to be and how many snaps he's going to get and stuff like that. But again, you can grab this guy outside of probably the top, easily the top 5, probably the top 10, maybe top 12 in most drafts at this point. So the risk is minimal. And if it, like you said, if it doesn't work out, you just find somebody else off the waiver wire pretty easily. All right, let's go to another safety here. So I went with Kyle Duggar. of the New England Patriots. So Duggar last year, or well, in 2021, I should say, posted a very strong 92 tackle season on just a 77% snap share. That allowed him to land inside the top 10 safeties and tackles versus expected that season. Unfortunately, 2022, the role it stagnated a little bit. He dipped to 74% of defensive snaps, so just a little bit of a drop. But I think it was more the significant regression in his tackle numbers that kind of hurt him more than anything. Finished with fewer than 80 on the year, so that came in below average in tackles versus expected as well at negative 4.4 for 2022. And the optimism for me for a bounce back season for Duggar basically comes from his potential to hopefully see his snaps increase in what's going to be a contract year for him, where I think he might be called upon to fill at least some of the void left by the retired Devin McCourty. So look, he isn't likely to replace McCourty in a full-time deep safety role. McCourty was like a perennial 1,000 snap player on the defense. And, Duggar, I think, is at least capable of playing safety, deep safety, I should say. I, I don't know if the Patriots are going to want to pigeonhole him as just that near the line of scrimmage guy, because to be fair, that kind of has been what he is to this point in his NFL career. But I think there's a little bit more of a need there right now. And if you look at the safety room, he's easily the best safety that they have on that roster. I know he earned the 10th most wins above replacement among all safeties in 2022. So that's last season. And he's just got consistently better as an NFL player every single year that he's been in the league. So I'm hopeful that we see that snap rate rise above the 70, 75, 78%, get into more of the 85, 90% territory, hopefully. And look, deep safety obviously isn't something we want, but if it means that he's coming off the field less, it's still more opportunities for tackles. And I think he's still going to get a lot of that in the box snaps and near the line of scrimmage because he's so good at that. But again, it's the Patriots. It's Bill Belichick. There's no use trying to kind of predict what the hell they're going to do because odds are we'll be wrong. But yeah, I think he's earned a shot to play more snaps, but we'll see if the Patriots feel the same way.
Yeah, it's a tough one. It's part because it's the Patriots, but it's
Mhm.
trying to imagine how these guys fit together is really interesting to me. As like you mentioned, he's the best safety that they have on the roster. I don't think anybody would debate that. The thing about your best safety is it's like a Justin Simmons or somebody else. That's Minkah Fitzpatrick. It's probably a guy that you want to play deep a lot because
Mhm.
that's the most valuable role of the safety. I'd certainly agree. I think there's a good chance he plays 100% of snaps. I don't,
Nice.
I really do. But the question is how many of those are deep? And even, I mean, obviously he could play all the same box snaps he did and then just add deep snaps and his total value
Mhm.
would go up, which would be good. And that's, I guess, how I would imagine it. I can't imagine he's just going to play 600 snaps deep like McCurdy did a couple of years
Right.
ago, right? So they've got Jalen Mills back. Jalen Mills it was discussed or announced or something, whatever that's worth 3 months ago that they cut him. He was a cornerback and they cut him and they re-signed him to play safety, which is I'm not. So I guess they just said, yeah, safeties make less money, so we have to cut you and re-sign you as a safety. Okay, so I can't imagine Jalen Mills is going to be down there in the box because they got Adrian Phillips, they have this Marte Mapu guy, so they've got these guys that's the thing, right? So they've got Mapu, they've got Phillips, they've got Mills, and they've got Duggar, and seemed to me there was one other. Oh, we got Miles
Jabril
Bryant in there
Peppers.
as a slot. What's that?
Jabril
Oh, Jabril
Peppers.
Peppers, right? It's another one. So they've got all these guys that kind of fit as tweeners between the second and third level with 1 foot in each level, and that's the thing is trying to imagine how all that fits together is really interesting. And I certainly imagine that they'll be, they've been on trend with making these safeties more interchangeable. I expect that will continue. Be interested to see if they show any more too high at all, or if they just really kind of just rotate one guy after another back there and see where that goes. But so many guys that are just in there. It's one of those too many mouths to feed situations between Peppers and Phillips and Mapu, and Jawan Bentley's going to play 75-80% of the snaps as the primary linebacker. And so I guess I guess it's like you said, it's hard to predict. You gotta hope, but this is certainly the guy that has the upside. So he's certainly a safety one for me. And I'm optimistic he plays 100% of the snaps. So I'd certainly take take a stab at him here.
Nice. Love it. Love to hear it. Yeah, I'm excited. I think there is definitely a snap increase in the cards for Kyle Duggar. And yeah, I'm with you. I hope it is going to be 100% because that would be very nice for IDP. Let's go on to another safety here with your Dallas Cowboys. Who do you got?
Jaron Curse is a guy that is probably not going to play 100% of the snaps, which kind of makes me sad. This probably makes me a little unhappy, and it makes me think that this might be a little bit of a risky call. But he did play 100% of the snaps, or at least most games. 2 years ago, was wearing the dot, and then last year got hurt early in the season and seemed to lose momentum. And certainly, it took him 2 or 3 games to really even kind of recover and get it back up to full speed. In the meantime, fantasy gamers got excited about Donovan Wilson. Well, Donovan Wilson is fine. He's kind of a nice player, but he's just kind of a conventional safety. And these two guys are your starting safeties in base sets. And then Malik Hooker comes on the field as a primary deep safety. When that happens, it is Jaron Curse and not Donovan Wilson who plays the hybrid linebacker role. Mm-hmm. And so Wilson is just a safety. He was more successful and, in my opinion, more fortunate to collect sacks than Curse was. But my opinion is that safety sacks really aren't about being good at pass rushing. It's about the right play call at the right time. And we saw Wilson effectively fire downhill a couple times on prime time and make some big plays, which were certainly exciting. But I don't think that you can rely on that happening year over year. And I really think that this is a situation where these guys are upside down in the rankings, a little bit like the Packers linebackers, where Curse is the guy he's not playing deep very often. He's playing overhang. He's playing on the line. So he might not have quite the box numbers that Wilson has as a strong safety, but you posted some information about these guys' tackle rates a couple weeks ago. And Wilson had a 9.9 tackle rate. Tackles per snaps, and Curse had a 9.6. It's not awesome, but establishes a high enough floor that he can go out there and have some opportunities to rush the passer, have some opportunities on the edge. And he's a lengthy guy. He's 6'4", 215. He breaks up passes. He has the length to break up passes, and this is an aggressive defense that's looking to deny receivers football. He had eight pass breakups last year, as I recall. I think he did each of the last 2 years. So if you're in a league that's scoring those two, then I think he's a pretty attractive guy. And what I've been finding in my leagues as I draft is that I'm almost always taking defensive backs last, literally filling out my entire roster and then taking defensive backs, unless I feel like a guy has really slid. And the only 2 guys I'm seeing slide to the point where I'm thinking about steering away from that formula are Harrison Smith, who is inexplicably underrated. The Tipster Greek podcast I mentioned earlier, they said he was 31st on sleeper ADP. What did people do there? That's crazy. I can't call him a bounce back candidate because he was a DB1 last year. He's going to be a DB1 again this year. So I guess just take the value and run. Curse is the other guy. He's the other guy that really lasts a long time. Dozens of defensive backs come off the board before Curse. Oh, yeah. And this guy has not quite optimal, awfully close to optimal deployment in terms of being a guy who doesn't play a lot of safety. And that's what you want as a safety who doesn't play a lot of safeties.
Yeah, I'm 100% with you again. I mean, I love Curse, and I've consistently ranked him above Donovan Wilson, and will grab him late in so many leagues. I wish I could pull up the sleeper, what's it called, the exposure rates for how many times you have a player, because you're right, Jaron Curse just falls and falls and falls to the late rounds, and you're right. When you get to that range, he has one of the best alignments and deployments that you're going to get from the safety position among the guys that are left. Obviously, Harrison Smith is in that category as well. Maybe not as ideal alignment, but the snaps are 100%, right? So that's the main thing with Harrison Smith. That really must be Dynasty ADP or something, because Harrison Smith at DB 31 is wild to me. But anyways, that's you're right. It's crazy. I love Jaron Curse. I mean, again, just the 77 tackles last year, but he does a lot of good things. He had the 2 sacks, he had a pick in there, some fumble stuff. He's just solid across the board, and I think he could very well be in for better tackle numbers in 2022, especially still being in Dallas. That defense loves to utilize the 3 safeties, like you said. Him and Wilson are the ones that kind of benefit the most from those alignments, but I still prefer Curse over Donovan Wilson for 2023. I'm with you for that one for sure. All right, last name on the board. It is another safety, and I'm going. Look, it's my second New York Giants player. It is Xavier McKinney. So McKinney, I think, definitely let down a lot of IDP managers in 2022. He appeared in just 9 games, only 45 tackles, after racking up more than 90 in his first full season in 2021. He's now missed significant chunks of 2 of his 3 seasons in the NFL, which definitely creates some cause for concern about his ability to stay healthy in 2023. But I think, assuming he stays healthy, he should return to a role that allows him to kind of play various alignments across the defense, including being the primary option, and maybe rotate into the box for ideal IDP production. He was on pace for about 80 tackles in 2022, with more games played. It would have likely been more big plays as well. Instead, it was actually Julian Love that became the kind of main beneficiary of McKinney's absence. He produced at a high level for IDP managers instead. With Love off to Seattle, I think we should get another shot for Xavier McKinney to perform well here. I'm not taking him as like a top 12 guy. I think a lot of people were excited about him in that range going into last year, top 12, at least top 15. But as a safety too, I think you can do a lot worse than Xavier McKinney, and I don't think he'll be costing as much, because I think people are down on him after letting them down in 2022.
Well, I might be a glutton for punishment. I was one of those guys last year that had him around 12th or so, and I had him as a breakout
Sure.
player. I thought that people will thought that would be high, and then I think there were folks. I think one of the guys at the IDP show had him top 5. It's like, oh, well, I guess I'm actually down on him. Well, I'm higher on him this year than I was last year, to be honest with you.
Nice.
So I have him as a safety one. I thought an interesting point on that player card you just had off of this, that he was 91st at his position at a rate of tackles for loss and no gain. This is a guy that's playing on the line a lot.
Yeah.
He's playing on the line. His deployment was it's not like he was deep all the time. Yes, he played some deep snaps, but he was on the line. He was blitzing. He was getting into the backfield. He just didn't collect those tackles for loss and no gains. And I think a lot of it has to do with, like I mentioned earlier, the right play call at the right time for these safeties. They're not up there. They're not going to fend off an offensive tackle and make a play in the backfield. That's just not, that's not what
Right.
you expect to happen for a 205-pound player. So it's got to be situationally the right opportunity for him to make a play. And the second thing is, these margins are thin. We're talking about players that we say, oh, this safety rushes the passer and that one doesn't. We're talking about 4 or 5 pass rushes a game,
Mhm.
and so the opportunities to make a play, just the sample size is just not very high. And so we're talking about just a flat position where you're looking at guys that are getting 9 to 10% tackle rates, and you just need a handful of big plays to really move the needle. And I think that his deployment was good enough last year that he could have had that. Things just didn't
Yeah.
break his way. And the second thing was that Love was just a compiler on a team that had nothing at linebacker, just
Yeah.
nothing. Well, they've upgraded with Bobby Okereke this year, and they've swapped out Love with Bobby McCain. And I'm interested to see who wins that position battle to play opposite of Xavier McKinney. Because if it's McCain, I mean, McCain has always been a deep guy and a slot guy.
Mhm.
Now, Love had been too going into last year, so it's worth noting. But still, I'm if Okereke wears the dot and McCain is winning the job, McKinney all of a sudden has free reign to attack and make plays, and that's one thing I'm going to be watching for during the preseason, if we can find that out, is to see how what the starting defense is going to look like and how that fits together. I really think there's a lot of upside from
Mhm.
McKinney based on what he had last year, and I think that the deployment, like I said, wasn't as bad as people might think. I think that they just look at Love's tackle numbers and they just assume that McKinney was deep guy all the
Right.
time. And that's just not quite right. This is an aggressive defense, and but that said, all safeties are being used more interchangeably these days. There's very few guys, and there's a handful of them, I think Javon Holland and Juan Thornhill played a ton of deep snaps, but for the most part, there's not guys out there playing just 700, 800 deep snaps and stand back there. Every team is doing more to show a two-shot high look pre-snap and make you guess which guy's going to come downhill. And the Giants are among those teams that are willing to do that. And so I would think that if he's out there with Bobby McCain, that Bobby McCain is more likely to be deep more of the time, and that McKinney's opportunities to make plays will even go up relative to what he had last year.
Yeah, I think that makes perfect sense. I mean, McCain makes it seems like the obvious choice to leave deep. And if you look at some of the games last year with Don Martindale as the defensive coordinator and how he was using Julian Love, he was using him almost as a linebacker for a lot of the games that were played. And there's no reason that he can't use Xavier McKinney in a similar role, get those ideal alignments, and then he could potentially, outproduce a lot of the expectations for him this season. So, yeah, excited about McKinney. I think he's again another one of those guys that could be a great value, that could potentially push for that safety one range, like you said. So, but yeah, that's gonna do it for all of our bounce backs. Sorry, I almost called them breakouts, but bounce back candidates for the 2023 season. I thank you all so much for listening, and a big thank you to the man, Tripp. Really appreciate you taking the time to come on the show again with me. It means a lot. I'm glad we could give the listeners some more of that brilliant Tripp insight. So thank you.
Well, thanks. Very kind to call me brilliant. I appreciate it. It's always fun to be on and talk football with you, and I'm happy to have the opportunity to pick your brain and ask you some questions.
Absolutely, man. Anytime. But yes, before you go, please remind everyone again where they could find you and your work.
I'm over at footballguys.com these days and been writing articles about new defensive coordinators implementing scheme changes and what I think that might mean for their outlooks going forward. And that's a whole lot harder than it was 5 years ago when I started doing it. So I'm interested to hear folks' feedback of what they think, and always happy to interact with folks on Twitter and talk some football.
Yeah, some really, really good stuff there, and yeah, insightful looks into defensive scheme changes from Tripp. Definitely something you'd want to check out. As for me, everything I write up is up on pff.com. I'll be updating my rankings and tiers for next week as well, so be on the lookout for that. I'm also on the PFF Fantasy Podcast, talking offense with the great Nathan Yonke. We moved that show to 2 episodes per week now, that the season is within reach. So excited to talk more football over there as well. And of course, I'm still here talking IDP every other week in the IDP show feed. And speaking of which, we will be back in 2 weeks with another brilliant mind. Mr. Justin Varnes is coming back on to talk our favorite IDP values heading into the 2023 season. So I am very much looking forward to that. And until next time, IDP out.